excited to be with you. Listen, the elders here at Luxahoma are concerned about your home. They're concerned about your family. That's why they have scheduled the lessons this week on this occasion to be about the home. Tim is interested in your family, but most importantly, God is interested in your family. In addition to the fact that the elders at Luxahoma and the leaders here and even God is interested in your home, may I also make one more observation? In case you don't realize that Satan is interested in your home. Satan is interested in your family as well, and he has been wreaking great havoc on many homes all across the fruited plain. Sadly, Satan has been having an effect not just on the homes out in the world, but Satan has been creating chaos even in homes within the Lord's church. I've been able to have some opportunities through the years, most recently as I've been working with the Lord's church over in Defeated. We're right around the road from Difficult, Tennessee, so there you go, right? I have been fortunate to be able to be a substitute teacher. I love it. I've been doing it now for about 3 years, substitute teaching. It's one of the ways that I have been able to meet more people in the community by being able to do that. But it's also been very enlightening. I would imagine there may be some educators in the assembly even this morning. So you know all too well what homes are like. You can see it in the classroom. I could imagine, I'm not insulting your intelligence, but you know that we can solve so many of our problems if we solve the problems in the home. We can solve so many problems in society. We can solve so many problems in the world if we start by solving the problems in the family. The psalmist wrote this beautiful psalm, 5 verses. I can't think of a better text to lay a foundation and jumpstart our study over the next 4 days together than this psalm right here. Verse 1, David says, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain." It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hands of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. I would like for us in this Bible class hour to examine these 5 verses and allow David to share with us some much needed information as a way of jump-starting our series of lessons together. We're going to make 4 observations from this text. Number 1, I want us to note the construction of the home. The construction of the home. The verse begins, the psalm with verse 1 begins, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it." Except the Lord build the house. I know that you know as well as I do, there are far too many families around the world that are striving to build their homes the way they want to build them. Because you see, they do not believe that God is the creator of this sacred institution. Those of us who have any kind of belief in God and His Word know very well that the home and family began with the mind of God as we see it unfold before us in Genesis chapter 2. When even Jesus Himself would reiterate what was in the beginning in Matthew chapter 19, and Paul even brings in Ephesians chapter number 5, the home is built by God. Now, if you don't believe that, then you can certainly construct your home any way you want. And that's what we have, right? We are living in a day and a time in which individuals are saying, we're going to build our home with two mommies. We're going to build our home with two daddies. We're going to build our home any way we want. And so we have this hole. We've been dealing with this for decades now, church, and we're dealing now more than ever with homes that are constructed with L, G, B, T, Q, and now on the end they just added a little plus, right? They're constructing the home they want to construct it. Because to them it's just a social construct. It's that which has evolved through society and in civilization. And now with the current times, they can make it any way they so choose. David, the sweet psalmist of Israel, says to us, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. There are even though it's not necessarily in congruence with the laws of the land, but there are families right here in America that are constructing their home with multiple wives, polygamists. Now, I know that, and I bet many of you know that as well, because they have made an entire television series about it. How many of you have ever heard of the show called Sister Wives? I'm not asking if you ever watched it. I'm just asking if you ever heard of it, right? Many of you have. Sure you have. It's an entire series devoted. I find it interesting. I promise you, you're probably not going to believe me after I share this, but I'm not an avid watcher of the program, but every once in a while my curiosity is piqued. And so it just so happens that lately, I don't even know how many years this series has been running, but now some of those wives have left. The man's name is Cody, and moved away, and it is now drama, may I say, chaos. And I could imagine if we were able to go back and watch from the very beginning, the whole premise of the program is to show how a man with multiple wives can have a sweet, loving, fulfilling relationship and family. And now fast forward to what it's like today. And then you imagine all of the children born into this situation. Listen, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. It's quite complicated. I know some of us probably wish at times we had a marriage manual to help us with our marriages. Fact is, we have one. You have it too. It's right here. How many of you wish you had a parenting manual to help you deal with difficulties in rearing children? Listen, you've got it. It's right here. God built the house, and He's provided for us the blueprint and the instructions in how the house is to be built. I am grateful that God is the great home builder. Now, the fact of the matter is, as I alluded in the introduction, that not only is God the great home builder, conversely speaking, Satan is the great home wrecker. Satan's the great home wrecker. And this is what we're dealing with today. This is what we're seeing. Satan has hurt so many families that were struggling. I don't know what your home is like. I don't know what your family's like. I don't know what your situation's like. And here's the truth of the matter. Those of us who have lived any length of time understand this all too well. We're able to come into an assembly like this to be around brethren that we know and love on a regular basis, and we're able to put on a wonderful front and make things seem like our home is just fine, but no one knows what's going on within the four walls of your home except you and God. It doesn't matter, church, how pious we are as we will later observe the Lord's table. If you have already been fussing and fighting around the breakfast table, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. The construction of the home. Number two, notice with me the conservation of the home. The conservation. The next phrase in verse 1 says, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. The Lord not only constructs the home, He keeps it. That is, He protects it. He's interested in its preservation. And certainly we ought to be grateful for that. When David uses the term city, he's merely pointing to now the collection of homes. That's what a city is. Multiple homes all together. David in the context is informing us that the same one who constructs the home is the same one who's interested in preserving it. And we ought to allow God not only to build our homes and guide us in such, but we ought to allow God to preserve our home. But here's the problem, church. Too many individuals are not allowing God to preserve and to conserve, protect, keep our home because we're throwing loaded grenades ourselves. We're ruining the opportunity for God to protect our home. And I've listed a number of ways that we go about that. How will God be able to protect and conserve our homes if we, within the home, become involved in fornication and adultery? Subpoint number one. How are we going to do that? One of the most destructive things we can do to relationships in the home is become involved with adultery and fornication. Now, there may be some teenagers, young adults in the assembly this morning. Listen, I'm speaking to you first. if you are involved in relationships that are reserved by God to only be for marriage, but you are involved outside of the bounds of marriage at this young age, please, please, please stop. Please stop. You're hurting yourself, and you're damaging the definition of what God's intention for love is for you to learn. It will ruin your life. It may be, number two, that there are men and women, married individuals, who are involved in the sin of adultery. Do you remember what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 6:18? He said, flee fornication. Flee it. Run away from it. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body. But he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. That's what Paul wrote. That's what he told us. Adultery and fornication will harden our hearts against God. They will harden our hearts against our spouses. They will kill our sensitivity to love. They will warp our perception like nothing else can. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be a lover of history to know the downfall of many major civilizations goes back to sexual immorality. The downfall of Rome, the downfall of Egypt, the downfall of Babylon. Might God be watching as we speak the downfall of the United States of America? As we become so engrossed as a nation with sexual immorality. We cannot have the conservation of the home that God wants if we are self-imploding and self-destructing from within. What about drug abuse? Drug abuse. We are, as a people, as a civilization, we are so dependent upon substances. Some individuals look to them for emotional release. Some of them certainly need some desensitization, if I can make up that word, right? There are a number of reasons why people turn to alcohol. We are living in a time in which now marijuana use has really exploded. A lot more than it was 20 years ago, that's for sure. And now it seems as if we have a nation, a world filled with individuals that look to some form of substance to do something to them, to alter them psychologically, emotionally, mentally, or even physically. And it's hurting homes. Alcohol abuse hurts homes. Even marijuana abuse hurts homes. And statistics are out there to show such. What about media? Not only are we having to deal with, as we've been dealing now for decades, with the problems of television and music and Hollywood. We've been dealing with that for years. We've been preaching on that for years, but now it's almost as if that's forgotten. Because now we have this wonderful thing called social media. And so on top of all of the destruction of what we fill our minds, all of the immoral garbage that people watch and hear and see, now we have to deal with all of the destructive qualities that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, all of the social media difficulties, and that's now on top of everything else. Is that hurting homes? Ask the parents who just lost their 13-year-old child because she committed suicide for being bullied by some children at school over social media. Ask them if it's hurting the home. Ask the husband who lost his wife because she got into a chat room with an old fling from high school and ran and left him and the children. Media, social media, it's killing us. How can God conserve our homes when we're self-destructing from within? Listen, we're dealing with a situation where we have people who will binge Netflix, and they barely give time at all to reading God's Word. They'll spend hours on Facebook, but they won't spend 30 minutes in God's book. We're killing ourselves. And then number 4, there's neglect. Parents who are actually neglecting their families, they're neglecting their children, they're neglecting, husbands and wives neglecting each other. How can God conserve our families when we are destroying them ourselves from within? Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. Number 3. Notice with me the contentment of the home. The contentment. Verse 2, it is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. Now, what does that mean? What's David talking about here? In the context of what we have just noted, he's talking about those who are discontent, the lack of contentment. Are there husbands and wives, mothers and fathers that spend so much of their day working themselves to the bone, striving to give everything for their families, and yet in reality, they're hardly ever there for them? It may be the father that says, well, I know what Paul wrote in 1 Timothy 5:8, that if a man provide not for his own family, he's worse than an infidel. And so he's working overtime to provide all that he wants and desires for the home. Husbands and wives, mothers and fathers very often will convince themselves to provide what they did not have in their youth. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently, except that in some cases, the lack of content is creating a home that God does not desire. Let me paint for you a picture. Hypothetical, but I hope very realistic. Here's Brother and Sister Smith. I apologize if we have any Smiths in the assembly. It's just a common name, right? Brother and Sister Smith, good couple, have some children. They want to provide everything for their family that they did not have. Maybe both of them were reared in homes where they didn't have a whole lot, and so they want to have the nice home. They want to have the dependable cars. They want the vacations because they never had that. And in today's culture and climate, economically speaking, they've got to work long hours to be able to be sure that Bobby has his ball games and Susie has her piano recitals. And they work and work and work and provide everything of a material nature, rising up early, staying up late. And the reality is you only have your children with you for 20 years or so, and they're gone. And Brother and Sister Smith look around, and while they worked so hard and provided as much as they could, now they look and, they brought little Bobby and Susie to church with them every Sunday, but there wasn't that time of spiritual strengthening by them in the home outside of the few hours a week here in worship. So no wonder that they turn around and they look, and Bobby and Susie are now off in college. Now they're creating families of their own, and they've left the Lord. They're not faithful. They're living their own lives because there wasn't that foundation while they were at home. They provided everything for them materially and very little spiritually. That's what David here is talking about. Eating the bread of sorrows. Don't forget about your family. Godliness with contentment is great gain, 1 Timothy 6 and verse 6. It doesn't matter if you lay your head down on your pillow in a palace or in a tent. What matters is whether or not the Lord is the Lord of your life. That's what's important. The contentment of the home. Let's conclude with the children of the home, verses 3 through 5. The children of the home. And there are 3 subpoints we can look at as we look at these final verses. Beginning with number 1, the desire for children. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward. Look at how children are to be desired by mothers and fathers. Unfortunately, children are not always looked at as objects of desire. Unfortunately, there are families and individuals that look at children rather as burdens. They're looked at as penalties. They're looked at as inconveniences. I mean, isn't that the number one reason why individuals get abortions? It's because they're an inconvenience. I have my whole life set out before me. I'm on the corporate pathway, and now I'm pregnant. And I don't want my life derailed. And children are very often looked at as an inconvenience. God says they're a blessing. a blessing. In fact, many modern movements today try to persuade us that children will end up cramping your style, that you're not really going to be fulfilled with children because of the ways in which they disrupt your life. You're never going to be able to do all the things you're going to do. You're not going to be able to travel and see the things you want to see. David says children are an heritage from God. They're a gift. They don't make rich people poor, but they definitely make poor people rich. Oh, yes. You see, you and your wife, you cannot take any of your money or physical possessions with you to heaven. But you know what you can take with you to heaven? You can take your children. You can take your children. That's why David says later in verse 5, happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. My heart goes out to couples who cannot have children. I don't know, there may be some couples in the assembly here who are just like that. Oh, you understand all too well this sentiment because you would do anything to have children. And if you're barren and you cannot conceive, my heart does go out to you. I would ask you to keep praying and not lose hope. The number of times, I'm sure some of us in the assembly have seen couples who go years without children, and then even after they may adopt children and bring them into a home full of love, then all of a sudden, surprise, you're pregnant, right? It happens so many times. So don't lose heart. If God chooses to bless you, you will understand what this means. The desire for children. Number two, there's the direction for children. The direction. As arrows are in the hands of a mighty man, so are children from the youth. Now, I would imagine, I feel pretty confident that we've got some hunters in the assembly. Those who like to go bow hunting, maybe, and you understand, I'm not necessarily a bow hunter, but I have a little bit of knowledge of what transpires, and it's fascinating. The bow hunters know very, very well that you can take these arrows and that you can polish them. The shafts of the arrows can be polished so that there is minimal wind resistance. And you polish those arrows, and then you point those arrows in the direction, and then you can propel those arrows. And that's exactly what David says children are to us. While they are in our homes, under our care, we're polishing them. We're spending time preparing them. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition. We're polishing and polishing and polishing. And then because all the while we're getting ready to point them in the direction they are to go. Isn't that what Solomon wrote for us in Proverbs 22:6? Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. So we polish and we point, and then we propel them. And we send them out into the world after having them for just a short time. The direction of children. Finally, we see the dependability of children. The dependability. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Now, it's a little bit confusing as to who is being talked about in that last section of verse 5. I feel pretty confident as I follow the pronouns that it's speaking of the children. Happy is the man, singular, who hath his quiver full of them, speaking of his children, plural. Then he immediately says, they. See, the father was mentioned singularly, the children's plural. So when he says, they shall not be ashamed, I believe he's talking about the children. When we as fathers, in conjunction with the insurmountable service that mothers provide, together when we bring them up in a godly home, when they leave, we propel them as arrows. When they leave home, being reared in a godly home, they will not be ashamed of wearing your name. Oh, you're Sam Wilcutt's son? You're Sam Wilcutt's daughter? That's right, as they say with a smile on their face. Oh, you're Tim and Robin's child? Oh, yes, they will not be ashamed because their childhood was filled with love and godly instruction and preparedness. They will not be ashamed. And then furthermore, you as mother and father will not need to be ashamed of them because they will be able with confidence to handle even the enemies as they speak with them in the gates of the city. You do not need to fear because you prepared them well. The dependability of children. Now, I'd like to challenge all of us to realize that we want to build homes the way God desires homes to be constructed. And I want us to understand that as we shoot our children out of our homes, preparing them for independence, they, as an arrow with a warrior, they will be able to go places you and I will not be able to go. They will have an influence in areas you and I will not have any opportunity. It's imperative we prepare them well. As the well-beloved hymn states, God give us Christian homes. That's the prayer on our lips. It's the prayers on the lips of the elders here. And I thank you for your attention. Look forward to